Welcome to Wild Worcestershire, the podcast from Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. Each episode will explore the wild corners of our county. From ancient woodlands to whispering wetlands, along the way we'll meet the people working to protect these places and uncover the hidden lives of the wildlife that calls them home. This is a space for stories, for connection and for celebrating nature right on our doorstep. So come with us and discover the wild side of Worcestershire. Hello and welcome to today's programme. Now today you find me at Chapter Meadows in Worcester. It's a floodplain that's right beside the River Severn, right opposite the cathedral, and there's a path that runs up and down both sides of the river. And people often wander past this. Sometimes people come in and use Chapter Meadows to walk their dogs. Now it's a space that regularly holds floodwater, and in actual fact if I'd have been stood here 3 days ago I would have been knee deep in floodwater. But this space, this area, Chapter Meadows, helps to protect the city, but it's also becoming a place of restoration. Now volunteers are here today planting trees. We have students from the University of Worcester, we have the landowner here, and we have staff from Worcestershire Wildlife Trust as well. All of them are working together to help improve this urban green space. Now the thing is, with trees, they will naturally help with flood management, but they're also great for supporting biodiversity, and they're also great for strengthening the landscape for the future. And in this episode you'll hear from the people involved, why they're here planting trees, what it means for the river, and why partnerships for this really matter. Now, if you're not already aware, my name's Lee Robinson and you're listening to the Wild Worcestershire podcast from Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. So to begin with, I spoke to Beth, who is Worcestershire Wildlife Trust's Water and Wetlands Officer, and I asked her to tell me a little bit about hydrology and floodplains so that we get a really good understanding.
Hiya, I'm Beth. I'm the Wildlife and Water Officer for Worcestershire Wildlife Trust.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you for meeting me down Riverside today. I'm by the River Severn and it's still very much swollen from all the rain that we've had, and we're going to be having a look at some tree planting that's going on. And I'm going to have a little chat with Beth about the waterways. It's a topic which I'm fairly familiar with, having lived in Upton upon Severn for quite a few years, and I was also part of a water rescue team, so I know all about floodwaters. Usually I was in them rather than watching them, but hey ho. Right, okay, so Beth, we're walking alongside the River Severn here in Worcester, and it's a lovely calm day, but there's lots going on beneath the surface. So to start off with, can you kind of put water into its wider natural context for us? What we're really looking at when we walk beside a river like this?
So the River Severn is the UK's longest river. It's at the moment very swollen because we've been having a lot of rain. So basically wherever rain will land, it will probably eventually either work its way down into groundwater or work its way into a river, and that can be through different various ways. It can come in via groundwater, or it can come in over land flows, but yeah, that's why we're looking at quite a busy river at the moment, I suppose. Right.
So is the river sort of like the end of the journey for water, if you like?
No, there's no end of sort of the water cycle. This is just a natural part of it. So the water that's currently in the Severn, it will eventually make its way out to the Severn estuary and then into like the Bristol Channel and the Atlantic Ocean, I guess, eventually, and then through various ways it'll evaporate back up into the atmosphere and then arrive back onto ground through precipitation, so like rain, snow, that sort of thing. Yeah,
okay. So we hear a lot about the slowing of the flow of water, especially after heavy rainfall. Why does water actually need space in the landscape?
It does have to go somewhere. So water has always had seasonal fluxes. So in the winter when there is a less evapotranspiration going on, so it's not as hot, there's less mechanism for it to go back up into the atmosphere quickly. It is more likely to stay on the ground or in the ground for longer. So in the winter, when the rain falls, it's not as hot, so there's less chance for the water to get taken back up into the atmosphere by evapotranspiration, which means the longer that we can hold it in the landscape, either using vegetation to sort of break up the speed, or using natural features like ponds, or in some cases there's natural flood management features like leaky dams. They will hold the water back from reaching the river in such a quick time. It will all eventually either soak into be groundwater or reach the river, or be evaporated if it gets warmer. But basically we're trying to reduce the amount of water that immediately reaches the river, which can lead to quite the big sort of flashy floods that take people by surprise.
Right, okay. So how do natural features like floodplains and wetlands help water behave more like this?
It just basically gives them space so that the water can spread into that area. It can stay there until either it soaks back into the ground or finds its way back into the river or gets evaporated. It's making space for that water and having that multifunctional sort of blue-green space that the water can access without sort of causing damage to people or infrastructure, which is sort of what floodplain meadows have always been about. Seasonally they tend to be inundated with the water. They can hold the water there for a period, and then it will slowly find its way back into the atmosphere or the river. Right, okay. So we're obviously here today because we're going to be following a group of uni students who are going to be planting trees. So what role do trees and vegetation play in managing the water even before it sort of reaches the ground, let's say? Yeah, trees are really important in the water cycle. So if we go from the sort of top down, when trees are in leaf, they will act as a physical barrier when rain falls. They will hold sort of water droplets in their canopy, and then it will slowly either reach the ground or evaporate back into the atmosphere, again helping to slow the flow of what's actually reaching the ground, and then eventually a river or a groundwater source. And then as you work your sort of way down, the physical tree itself can act as a bit of a barrier, so that if water say flowing over a landscape, they can sort of create more of a rugged landscape, and that will slow the water. So basically the more almost friction you're creating in the landscape for the water, the longer journey it has to take to eventually reach the river. So that's what's sometimes meant about slowing the flow. Yeah. And then as you go underground into sort of the roots are really important, especially as we move towards the warmer months when maybe you're going to have less of an issue with flooding, more of an issue with drought. So the roots help the soil structure, so they create really good sort of channels for the water to then be stored underground, which does lead to drought resilience, but they'll also sort of make that ground hold the water for longer, so it's less likely just to evaporate and be lost into the atmosphere when sort of all the other plants need it the most. Right, okay. So would it be fair then to say that vegetation acts like a natural sponge or a buffer? Yeah, sponge and buffer. The trees in the landscape are extremely important to the water cycle all year round. So right. So I mean, standing here looking at the river, it's quite easy to think that this stretch of river is sort of like the whole story. But rivers don't work like that, do they? Can you explain what a river catchment is? Yeah. So a river catchment, broadly speaking, would be an area where your rain falls. Eventually then it will end up in the river, or in the aquifer, which then may eventually reach the river depending on the type of groundwater source it is. So if you think of it as almost a bowl, if you pour water around the edge of a bowl, it will eventually all pool in the middle, and that river is the pool of water in the middle of your bowl. It can take a long time. We can have different sort of sub-catchments. So, for example, this we're stood by the Severn, and the Severn basin is huge, but then it is split up into several different sub-catchments as well. So you'll have tributaries like the River Avon, which is its own catchment as well. But basically, where rain will fall, it will eventually end up in the river as part of the natural water cycle. Okay.
So, looking at this river at the moment, the way it's flowing, I mean, how far away has this water come from to reach us?
So it could have come up all the way from past Shropshire into Wales. So, you know, this river spans sort of 2 countries, several counties, and then it all sort of end at the Gloucestershire, really, the Severn Vale basin, and then it'll go out into the Bristol Channel.
I think I read somewhere that it's about 212 miles long or something like that.
Yeah.
And obviously then you've got a lot of water that's being added along the way from, as you say, from all the different rivers and all the brooks and streams that join it. I know that we've got the river team just down below us, haven't we? And I've noticed that what the water does, it tends to colour a bit.
Yeah.
When the river team is really flowing, it's really in spate, I've noticed that the water here goes quite a chocolatey colour, but only so far up towards the racecourse, and then it seems to stop and it changes to a different colour. So it's quite a bizarre phenomenon to watch it, really. So going back to the land-based idea of things, why do land use decisions miles upstream matter so much to places like Worcester?
So upstream, basically anything that will happen upstream will affect people, or in this case river, downstream. So if, for example, there's a lot of bank erosion, that will mean that more sediment will be flowing downstream, which will sort of lead into why the water here might be more chocolate coloured than you'd see further upstream. And it's the same for things like pollution incidents. If I test water here, it might be completely clean, but if I go 5 miles downstream, that it might not be as clean, or it could be cleaner. So throughout the river catchment, different things will be going on that then still flows downstream.
Right, okay. So when we think about, say, climate change or more extreme weather, what role can nature play in helping rivers like the River Severn cope better?
I think nature tends to have already thought of or developed a lot of coping mechanisms, and those coping mechanisms are really going to help us with our climate resilience going forward. So from the trees, we've already said how important they are to the water cycle, but on top of that, along this section of the river, you've got a lot of slightly overhanging trees. Those will be so important to, especially if we get hotter summers. They will shade the water and keep it cooler in patches for like fish and invertebrate that may suffer from heat stress. It'll also be things like having attenuation features, so if that's leaky dams or ponds further up the catchment, that will again hold the water in times of flood, but release it back into the ground, so that drought tolerance is there as well. The ground won't dry out as quickly as it might have otherwise. And then, as well as that, the biodiversity that wetlands can provide are going to be key. The more diverse something is, the more resilient it's going to be to change. So with the water environment, there's a lot going on which will be extremely sort of needed going into the future. Right.
I noticed I was actually listening to another podcast the other day, and they were talking about the role of beavers and the role that they're now playing further up in Scotland particularly. They've said that it's actually started to relieve issues in a small village that had a lot of flooding problems, because the beaver had created their own sort of habitat and built the dams and things and slowed the water up. Do you think that's something we might possibly see down here at a later date?
So in February last year, the government did announce that they are going to start issuing licences for wild beaver releases. At Worcestershire Wildlife Trust, it's not something that we've looked into, but we are expecting that somewhere along the Severn Basin a beaver will be released, or there may be multiple. At this point we don't really know, but it does look like eventually they will be a feature in sort of the Severn Basin catchment, in which case there is every chance that, especially as they sort of multiply in numbers, they might move out and reach Worcestershire. There are sort of conditions to the wild releases, so they will be sort of monitored. There has to be plans in place, so we can't necessarily let them say build a dam where we know it's going to say flood a residential area. Then there will be new sort of licenses issued so that people can manage that and maybe look at alternative places for the beavers to go, like in Scotland where there is more space for that water, but then it will help communities downstream. So beaver dams are great for increasing biodiversity because they make such a great mosaic habitat. They're great for catching sediment and pollutants in that sediment through their dams, and then they are one of the best things they can do with their ecosystem engineering is capturing all that flood water, holding it back and sort of slowing the peak flows further downstream.
Right, okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been really interesting to hear about the role played by the floodplain and how we deal with issues like flooding, but also the biodiversity and the trees, which we're going to be going and finding out a little bit more about in a minute, and also for telling us all about beavers, which I must admit I'm quite excited about. And I did hear a rumour that one was once spotted on the Droitwich Canal. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it has been mentioned a couple of times, so somebody said there is signs of beaver, so whether or not we've had one come down the canal, I don't know.
Maybe a rogue beaver.
Maybe a rogue
I don't
one,
think
yeah.
there's anything sort of official, but Wendy might be able to tell you more about that.
Who knows? Well, thank you so much for talking to us.
No problem, thanks for your time.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So that was lovely to chat to Beth and find out about the science behind it all and how slowing the flow, restoring floodplains and planting trees all helps to build resilience across the River Severn catchment. But none of that happens without people. So I spoke next to Conor McGoldrick from the engagement team at Worcestershire Wildlife Trust about why community involvement is so important in places like Chapter Meadows, but also how nature recovery only really works when everybody feels part of it.
My name's Conor McGoldrick and I work in the Neighbourhoods Nurture and Nature team in the engagement team at Worcestershire Wildlife Trust.
Brilliant. So we're at Chapter Meadows today, which is we're with the students from the University of Worcester who are all very busy planting trees at this moment in time. But before we talk about this place specifically, can you explain what the engagement team at Worcestershire Wildlife Trust actually does?
Well, we aim to get people locally in and around Worcestershire involved in nature in any way that we can, whether that is practical conservation on the ground, social prescribing for mental well-being, or just generally feeling good for being outside and helping wildlife. We want to enable the people of Worcestershire to enjoy the nature and the wildlife that we have in this county as much as possible.
Right, okay. So why is engagement such a crucial part of nature recovery? Why isn't it enough to just restore a habitat and hope people notice?
Well, I suppose with floodplain meadows, for example, it's a really ecologically sort of valuable and not hugely stable kind of habitat. So having engagement to use it to enable the locals who live around here to gain knowledge, to understand why these habitats are so important and the wide variety of species that are supported by sites like this, it really is such an arrow in our quiver, because we are a small trust, we're a small team, but work on this scale will never be possible without the support of the community around us. So engagement like this allows us to know that however long projects that we have at the Wildlife Trust are, there will always be that legacy that the communities around these sites have helped build them, helped understand why wildlife will benefit from our work here. And that gives the project that legs to really support nature into the far future, rather than just having short-term projects that effectively patch holes in places, rather than real on-the-ground sort of habitat enhancement.
Right, okay. So you work closely with the landowners and their teams of people. In this case, the owners of Chapter Meadows. How did that relationship begin?
So when the Duckworth Trust dissolved towards the end of 2024, 3D Total Publishing, headed by Tom Greenway, they made moves to take ownership of the site here, and initially they reached out to us to ensure that they were managing the site in a way that was effective for wildlife and wasn't going to cause any damage, which is very, very encouraging for us, because as soon as we hear landowners that really have a wildlife forward focus, we wanted to help as much as possible, really. So with Chapter Meadows being so central in the city and so visible from so many important landmarks, it really was a fantastic opportunity to work with these new landowners to create a space for nature that was as visible as possible in the middle of the city. So they initially reached out to us, but over the course of the last year and a half, we've had really fantastic opportunities to work with the landowners on a range of different tasks, be that hedgerow planting or woodland planting that we're doing today, also surveying events, bird walks. We've done such a wonderful range of activities here at the site, and most of it has been because of the great support of the landowners here. Yeah. So it's really vital to us that we can work in tandem with landowners like this, because it allows us to have more outreach into the urban areas of the city that we really want to talk to people in.
Right, okay. Now, earlier on this year I did an episode on Bull Meadow, and Chapter Meadows has a bit of its own story. Can you talk about how involvement here started with natural networks and how it's now being carried forward by the Wilder Worcestershire team?
Lovely. Well, Natural Networks obviously worked here in an advisory capacity a year or so ago to do surveys of the site, to talk about the floristic diversity and where the biodiversity of the site currently stands. And from that, they obviously produced a report that suggested various biodiversity enhancements around the site, which has been a bit of a working project bible for Tom and Becky as they manage the site here. So it's really transitioned from that advisory capacity with the Natural Networks team into using that advice and working with the community to put those plans into action. So it's lovely to be involved in such a natural progression from one team to the other, and really it makes the work that we do in the community engagement team so much easier when we can truly rely on the reporting and the biodiversity sort of surveying that has been done by the trust beforehand to ensure that we're really improving this place for wildlife in the most ecologically sensible way.
Right, okay. So today we've got students from the University of Worcester here, and they're getting involved and getting their hands dirty. Why is it so important to bring in volunteers and people from outside of the trust?
Well, as I said earlier, we are a small trust, and we really rely on the kindness of volunteers to get their hands dirty, as you say, and really get dug in and to get involved with conservation on this sort of scale, especially in the more urban areas of the county. Yeah, the reason it's so important to work with people outside of the trust is not only because we have a smaller working capacity with the size of the teams that we work in, but also because it's important to share that knowledge, share that desire to keep nature in Worcestershire as healthy as possible. And that's something that can't be done by just conservation trusts and conservation organisations alone. That's an effort that needs to be taken by the county at large. And we aren't the only ones to benefit from this nature. Obviously, nature is for everyone, and as a result, we want to work with everyone to make it as good as possible.
Right. So you've just mentioned there about sort of benefits. And you've talked before about nature helping people as much as people helping nature. So what does that look like in practice here at Chapter Meadows?
Well, we find that over the course of the last year or so, we obviously, in the engagement team, we're constantly chatting to people, constantly out and about in Worcester and Droitwich and the various urban areas of the county. And the amount of questions we get about work that is done at Chapter Meadows, how people have used the site over many years and how they've noticed changes happening. And it's incredibly encouraging to see that people use this site and they notice the differences that are being made. And every time we do any kind of practical conservation work here at Chapter Meadows, one of the things that we always notice when we talk to people at the end of sessions is how good they feel about being outside, being out doing something in nature, even when it's rainy and wet and muddy and it looks absolutely horrific when you start. Once you get people going and everyone's hands are a bit muddy, everyone's got a smile on their face. Everyone enjoys being outside and talking to people, and it's that level of community engagement, not just from us to the wider community in Worcestershire, but the community within itself. I think having a chance to introduce other people to each other, to have people meet who wouldn't necessarily have met before, purely for the reason of coming out and helping wildlife, it's a fantastic way to encourage people to be a bit more friendly.
Right, okay. Well, this is the last one from me. So if someone was listening and wants to take action for nature but isn't sure where to start, what would you say to them?
Come and volunteer with the Wildlife Trust. And if that's not a bit biased, I'd say just get out, go outside, use apps like Merlin Bird ID or Plant ID and stuff like this to challenge your knowledge about wildlife a little bit and learn a little bit every day. I can only speak for myself, but I would never claim to be an out-and-out expert at anything. I'm always wanting to learn, always challenging myself to learn new things about wildlife. And if that's something that everyone was doing, it would make it incredibly easy to continue this large-scale conservation work.
Okay, that's lovely. Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Cheers, Lee. Thank you very much.
So Connor makes it clear that nature recovery is a shared effort. It depends on volunteers, community groups and people giving their time. But projects like this also need long-term backing. Chapter Meadows is a rare thing in that it's a privately owned nature reserve, and the vision for its future is being driven by local businessman Tom Greenway, who is the owner of 3D Total Publishing. So I asked him why he chose to invest in this land, and also about how he sees tree planting and flood management, and also asked him to explain what he means by the idea of a wild island model. All of these things are coming together to shape the meadow for years to come.
Hi, I'm Tom Greenway. I'm the owner of 3D Total Publishing, which is a local publishing company, and we are now also the owners of the Chapter Meadows Nature Reserve. It's a local project that we want to take on, basically.
Right, okay. So I did a little bit of research before coming out today, and I read that you give 50% of your profits to charities and good causes worldwide. So how does supporting a place like Chapter Meadows through things like tree planting on the floodplain reflect those values at a local community level?
Well, we really wanted to do a local project because up until now, nearly all our charity work has been done on projects abroad, mainly because you do tend to get a little bit more for your money. The achievement is a little bit higher, generally speaking, doing projects abroad. But that said, it's really important to do a local project, not only for our own kind of motivation and inspiration, but just so myself and the staff and the local community, we can all get our hands dirty and get stuck in. So doing the mix now of local and charity work abroad, we think is really good.
Right, okay. So Chapter Meadows isn't just land that you own, it's part of a wider landscape that affects people sort of upstream and downstream of where we are. How do you see your role here in supporting the local community, particularly when it comes to managing water naturally?
Managing water, yes, it's becoming very challenging. I heard from the previous owners, I don't know how far we're going back, maybe a couple of decades, but they they think that they only flooded about once per winter, and since we've owned the meadows we've seen 2 or 3 winters here, we're looking at 7 or 8 times per winter. So things are definitely changing quite fast. So yeah, it's important to do what we can. The number one thing really is tree planting, which will definitely help hold back some of the flood water, contain it to a certain degree. And I think, just trying to make people aware of how things are changing and that action is needed.
Right, okay. So, I mean, today we've got a lot of students and volunteers and some of the conservation team from Worcestershire Wildlife Trust here. Why is it important to you that community involvement sits at the heart of projects like this, rather than just nature recovery happening quietly behind the scenes?
Well, this is a really important green space because it's pretty much in the centre of the city, which is very unusual to have 30 acres, in the middle of a city. So it's an ideal area to be a combination of a community green space and a nature reserve. So there's a slightly tricky balance there to get right, but we're sure it's very, very achievable. Yes, so many hundreds of people use and need this as a green space. So we're just going to try and enhance it in any way we can to make it as interesting as possible, as enjoyable as possible for people and for nature, and also for agriculture is thrown in the mix as well, being grazing meadows. Yeah. So this is the challenge. Yeah,
that's a big challenge. Yeah. Okay, so tree planting on a floodplain helps wildlife, but it can also help people by slowing water down and reducing flood risk. How does that connection between environmental action and community well-being sort of fit into 3D Total's wider charitable mission?
Well, at 3D Total we set out some aims with our charity work, and we tended to split all of the work and the money that we donate across humanitarian, animal welfare, and environmental. Those 3 sections. So this project it does meet all 3 really well, actually. And I think once things start to get moving with creating the new habitats and then tree planting and the new wild areas and getting the community to do those, I think it's just building more of a connection between people and nature that is possibly missing a little bit. Right. And that's, if we can achieve that through our sort of work ethos, just to strengthen the connection with people and nature as much as possible. Yeah. I think then it has a sort of ripple effect, and possibly good things just hopefully carry on happening, even outside of this project. Yeah.
Okay. So, as a creative business with a strong ethical focus, do you see Chapter Meadows as a way of showing how companies can give back to communities, not just through donations, but by caring for landscapes that support everyone?
Yes, I mean, it would be brilliant if there could be more privately funded nature reserves like this one, even if they're just tiny little areas. It would be wonderful if companies that are doing reasonably well and want to give back to their local area and community, if they can take on this sort of a project and sort of follow this example, would be wonderful. We want to sort of enhance the area as much as possible, but also put signs up to say it's us and we're doing this. Yeah. But just for other people to see, hopefully, and to realise that area, it is privately funded. Maybe I know someone who might be able to do something similar. Perhaps I think there's an assumption that all the green spaces are council spaces and paid for by people's taxes. Mm-hmm. So it's unusual to have one that's privately funded. And it would be wonderful again if there's another sort of ripple effect, and we could see more of this happening. We're creating these what they call wild islands. So it's a small fenced off circular area, so also called a roundel, and that creates a little wild island dotted around the meadows that will be grazed around the outside. I think visually it will look really, really good. And we're hoping maybe that companies might want to sponsor each one of these roundels. So it's a nice little way in perhaps for a company to have a mini legacy here, something that would last for decades. Maybe their staff could get involved. About 20 trees go into each one. You have to build this traditional fencing to create the roundel. So if companies, hopefully we'll launch something where companies can sponsor each one of these, have a little plaque on it maybe. The staff could join in creating it. And then every time the staff or the families walk along the riverside, they would see this little area they've created. Hopefully will be there for decades. Might be a really nice way in for a bit more corporate or commercial sponsorship, creating nature reserves and sort of wild areas.
Yeah, so it's just taking the traditional model and turning it on its head then. So as you say, it's always councils or it's trusts that are busy doing this sort of work. So turning it, and you set a great example of that from a commercial perspective. So yeah, it'd be really, really good to see that coming to fruition. So thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
So far today, on today's programme, we've heard from Beth about the science and how slowing the flow is restoring floodplains, and planting trees helps to manage water along the River Severn. We've talked to Connor, who's reminded us that none of this work happens without people, and that community involvement is what gives these projects legs, making nature recovery a shared effort across the county. We've also heard from Tom, who's shown us the role of long-term vision and support, and that his private investment in Chapter Meadows creates a space where trees, wildlife and people can all thrive together. But all of that, the science, the strategy, the funding, only really comes alive when someone gets their hands dirty. Now on the meadow today, we've got University of Worcester students who are here doing exactly that. I'm going to speak to Charlie, who's a sport and exercise science student, and Eunice, who's a first year biochemistry student. Both of them are here planting trees and seeing firsthand how conservation and flood management work in practice. So let's hear from them.
Hi, I'm Charlie Gibbs. I'm doing sport and exercise science at Worcester University.
Right, so you've come out today to plant trees. What convinced you to come out on a cold winter's afternoon planting trees on a floodplain?
Well, I did Wildlife Trust back in Northamptonshire and over the summer, and I thought looking for something to do, keep doing that kind of thing, so I'm back here doing Wildlife Trust with Worcestershire. Right,
so is the environmental stuff of interest to you then? Because you said you're doing a sports science degree, aren't you? But that's connected to the environment in a way as well. But is conservation something you would possibly think about doing in the future?
Yeah, I think the preservation of wildlife and keeping different plant species and animal species, just trying to maintain that as far as you can over the next decades or so is really important.
Right. And is this your first experience of coming out and planting trees with the Wildlife Trust?
Yeah, I haven't planted trees, I've felled trees, which is the opposite in a way, and that kind of stuff, but not planted trees. This is the first time. A bit more tiring than I expected, but...
Right. And so you say you're from Northampton?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, Worcester is a place that is prone to flooding, and the floodplain is obviously really important, and planting trees here is really important. What's your thoughts about flooding and climate change?
I think people seem to overlook it and they say they're going to do something, but the only way that you can do something is by getting out here today and really getting hands on with it.
Okay. Right, it's lovely. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries, cheers.
Hello, I am Eunice. I am a first year biochemistry student at the University of Worcester.
Lovely. So you're out here planting trees today. How does being out here planting trees change the way you think about flooding and water management?
So I'd say that planting trees can mean that the trees can suck in all the water that comes from the flooding, which is of course extremely important in today's society where flooding is very, very, very obvious that it's going to happen. So I think that is, very necessary.
Okay. Before today, did you think much about how trees affect rivers and flooding, or has this made those connections feel more real?
I think that at the end of the day, trees can be very, very, very helpful at stopping flooding, and so with the incredible kind of use of osmosis going from the soil to the plant, I think that that's extremely necessary in today's environment, and it can be life-changing.
Okay, lovely. So planting one tree can feel quite small. How do you now see that fitting into the bigger picture of slowing water and protecting places downstream?
Well, there are so many events of deforestation currently happening, and I think that having these trees planted today will definitely help the community stop future floodings from happening.
Okay, that's lovely. Well, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
And that's it for today at Chapter Meadows. We've explored how the science of slowing the flow along the river meets real-world action. We've seen how community engagement brings these ideas to life through the volunteers planting trees and students getting their hands dirty, and local people contributing to a greener, more resilient city. And we've heard how vision and long-term support, like Tom Greenway's investment, helps to create a space where wildlife, people and nature can thrive together. And every tree that's planted here is part of a much bigger story, a story about protecting biodiversity, managing floods naturally, and showing that small local actions really do make a difference in the face of climate change. Now, if today's episode has inspired you to get involved and you'd like to learn more or support the work of Worcestershire Wildlife Trust, there's lots of information to be found on our website, from volunteering opportunities to practical advice on creating wildlife friendly spaces, and you'll find the link for that in the description. Now, I've been your host, Lee Robinson, and this has been Wild Worcestershire. Thanks for listening, and I hope it inspires you to step outside, visit a meadow, visit a floodplain, and see what a little action can do for nature in your own community. So until next time, from me, goodbye.